Thomas, Donald Trump just tweeted out 2 tweets, and I think he could use your help. I've got to read the tweets to you. And this is April 6th, and it's the evening. Why should I be defending a fraudulent Russian witch hunt? It's about time the perpetrators of this fraud on me and the American people start defending their dishonest and treasonous acts. How and why did this terrible event begin? Never forget. He says, so let's get this straight. There was no collusion, and in fact, the phony dossier was a con job that was paid for by Crooked Hillary and the DNC. So the 13 angry Democrats were investigating an event that never happened and was, in fact, a made-up fraud. I just fought back against something I never knew existed. Collusion with Russia? So ridiculous. No obstruction. This Russia hoax must never happen to another president, and law enforcement must find out. And then he says in capital letters, and I think this is straight to you, Thomas. How did it start?
I'm so glad he asked. Now, I feel certain that President Trump has been given a full recounting of what it is that we've been saying for the last 2.5 years, because we told everyone how it would start in the CIA counterintelligence department through John Brennan, and through what we named would be John Brennan's top lieutenant that he would use to write national security letters for, so that they could spy on Trump as a secondary measure. But the first thing that happened, and to this day, I mean, I don't understand why no one has caught up to this. Just recently, I finally saw someone start back into the proper avenue, and that was to show that John Podesta received $35 million when he was on Juul Unlimited board directly from the Russian government, directly from, basically, Putin. And it was a payoff. So what was that payoff for? Well, it was because the Podesta brothers were representing the Russians, and they were lobbying, and that's the reason that they got their city of Skolkovo. That's the reason they got $1 billion investment from the Hillary Clinton corrupt State Department. Now, there are many answers to your question, Mr. President, but I'm going to go back to the key answer, and this is completely checked by simply going to the WikiLeaks site and looking these things up. In December of 2015, the Democratic National Committee got back not only an oppositional research report done on you, an initial one by Fusion GPS. It is a lie that Bill Kristol and the Washington Beacon paid for a Republican oppositional research study done on you, Mr. President. That's a lie. And that's been proven as a lie, but that narrative still goes on. The reality was, John Podesta found that he was completely compromised, not only because he was an agent of the Russians who didn't sign up for it, not only because he had constructed Skolkovo, and not only because of all the other crimes he's done, but because, in a minute, we're going to get into that he hired, of course, Mark Elias from Fusion GPS. Supposedly, we hear that he paid $12 million for the opposition research. Okay. There was no original Republican opposition research. That is a lie. That is the reason 2 different Republicans, Bill Kristol and another one, came out and claimed that they paid for it. Wrong. When that December, it was, I believe, December 15th, but 14th and 15th, there were 2 reports that were turned to them. It was a feasibility study on what are the odds of Hillary winning the election. And it was basically their own internal assessment, and it said she would lose the campaign because of her crooked, exposed, corrupt connection, collusion, corruption, conspiracy with Russia, and specifically Vladimir Putin. I mean, she's the one who brought the reset button. How is it that she reset the Cold War so that she could go in for Skolkovo, bring $1 billion in so that she would get the Uranium One deal? So in the WikiLeaks, it shows clearly that their most vulnerable point in their study was John Podesta's connection to Russia and Hillary Clinton's connection to Russia. So at that time, they decided, and they pulled in all of their forces, including Barack Obama, to say, how can we counter this? What kind of mirrors, what kind of smoke screen, what kind of magic and illusion? Well, they're not very creative, so they always just turn it around 180 degrees. We're going to blame Trump for Russian connections. And so they said, oh, easy, he was there for everyone knew he was there for Miss Universe. And they all thought, oh, he's a slime ball, because they never really listened to Trump. They never paid any true attention to him. And they were terrified because there was a report that had just been created, and they had informed Hillary, though they shouldn't have. Hillary did have intelligence access the whole time that she ran for president. That should be illegal. But anyway, the intelligence communities gave her everything that they had, and they said, oh no, Trump can easily be compromised with Russia. So they came up with the plan. That was in mid-December 2015. And no one except us pointed out, and now they go back to March of 2016 as the beginning of all of this, Mr. President, when the first payments were made by the FBI to Christopher Steele, which at that moment, now I'm going to have to tell 10 different stories of their excuses and how these different agencies all got involved. But if you want the real moment was the DNC's assessment that Hillary would lose because of her Russian connection, particularly with Uranium One, because she got paid $145 million very clearly, openly, complete defiance of her agreement that she wouldn't take from especially those nations, and also the Emolument Act she defied completely. She can't take money from those many nations. Many nations, no one actually knows how many nations she took money from as Secretary of State. But, she has a couple dozen foundations or more, and she was receiving money the whole time. And Bill received $100 million into a separate account called the Justra Clinton Sustainability Growth Fund. It's now changed its name since we've called them out, which is really interesting. And the name's completely different, and the mission's even different, but that's the new money. And I'm not going to name it because they'll just change it up again. But the point is, no one's looking into this. I swear, we are the only people who've ever mentioned this. And it's with the most corrupt person of all, Frank Justra. And then they had made a gold deal in perpetuity with Carlos Slim. So, Mr. President, it was at that moment early on, the actual moment was when they realized you were going to run. And the intelligence community report called...
It was Paradigm for Progress?
Yes.
Yeah.
Says that if someone came in with a populist, nationalist agenda, who was a good business person and who could actually address radical Islamic terrorism, they would have a tremendous chance of winning unless the Democrats go far to the left into really socialism. And this is what the report says. And this is what Hillary was working from. And so she saw early on that Donald Trump fit the bill of that exactly with what he's been saying for 20 years. And he was asked by many people to run for president. But when it comes down to it, it's when Donald Trump decided to run for president. So, Mr. President, the answer to your question is, when did all of this start? It was when you listened to Melania, finally, after how many hundreds, if not thousands of people said you should run for president, and you really sincerely asked her, and she said yes, because it transformed her life, your child's life, all your children's life permanently, because they entered into it's worse than a cesspool. It is a sewage treatment plant of Washington, D.C., the District of Crime. And look at what it's done to his family. They are attacked from every direction. They are called every name that there is. And what happens? They are not allowed to defend themselves. That's why Donald Trump says in this tweet, all I did was defend myself. He knew he was innocent from the beginning. He defended himself a little bit. He called it a witch hunt because it was, because he also knew the following. Immediately thereupon, when the Democratic National Committee saw that they were told they were going to lose, Hillary was going to lose, they had to create the biggest October surprise packages ever created in history. So we pointed out 28 of them for you, that were each one of them was a treasonous crime by James Comey. We've also pointed out quite clearly the crimes that came after. They actually started before July, started a few months earlier with John Brennan and creating his counterintelligence operation with no intelligence. Now, if you really want to go back, you got to look at why they went after Paul Manafort, and they had these weaknesses and why they were so mad. And when you took Paul Manafort and Roger Stone into your campaign, that was a very huge thing for them to go into hypergear. So if you want to talk about how they got Mueller involved and why Comey would perjure himself and exonerate Hillary, expecting you to fire him, especially because he perjured himself repeatedly. He was horrible to you. They made up some kind of rules that the president isn't in control of the FBI and the DOJ. That's complete nonsense. Or that none of the federal agencies are supposed to be controlled by the president now. As soon as Barack Obama was no longer in control, all new rules started. Well, of course he had to fire James Comey, but that wasn't the beginning of it. Robert Mueller was involved in Uranium One. So the second that they saw that the most vulnerable point in Hillary's campaign was Uranium One, who do you think they called in? 2 people. The 2 people personally responsible for Uranium One for over 10 years long, and we know that Mueller had the judge put a gag order, the FBI put a gag order on William Douglas Campbell, who's the whistleblower on this, and the evidence has come out because we've gotten evidence from the court case. And so Russians were put in jail after 10 years of ripping off America and paying Hillary for that ripoff directly, $145 million. Jonathan Weiner he said this on television repeatedly, that he saw the money transpire, and so did William Douglas Campbell. So it was at that moment that Hillary, through the CFIUS committee, and others allowed the 5 other committees that had to support that CFIUS committee, and then Barack Obama was then recommended by Hillary Clinton to Barack Obama, and it was Barack Obama who gave away 20% of our uranium to Putin himself through Rosatom and TENAB and 10X that were here in America, and a 10-year spy ring in America, a dozen agents, all captured and sent out of the country, none of them prosecuted. So we're talking about that was the vulnerable moment, and they thought they could get you. So they brought in the 2 biggest people involved, Mueller and Andrew McCabe. Andrew McCabe, for 10 years, worked for Mueller to cover this up. He was the head guy for Russian crimes. Right here in America, he didn't prosecute any Russians. He covered up for the Russians. And what was he given then? He was given, people keep downgrading the amount, $750,000 from 2 different funds. But most of it, a huge part of it came directly from Hillary Clinton's Victory Fund, and the other one through the Governor Terry McAuliffe, who had been the founding chairman of the Clinton Foundation, who then gave from the state funds about $500,000, unheard of, to Andrew McCabe's wife's campaign, which she lost. So she had $750,000 to win a simple campaign, couldn't. And Andrew McCabe at the same time was under 4 investigations himself, but he was investigating Hillary. He was the top person and let her off. Isn't that amazing? Went after Flynn, went after Papadopoulos, knew all of this was going on. Andrew McCabe started an investigation, an illegal investigation on the president the day after he fired Comey, and then lied about it to the public. He lied about it in testimony, and he lied about it everywhere. And that isn't even one of his crimes. And yet he had a grand jury indictment on him for not having candor, which is basically leaking and lying, and we don't even know if anything's going to happen.
Listen, the election of Donald Trump and him going to Washington was just huge. I mean, the swamp was blown up, but the residual effect didn't just stop there. It went all the way back to the United Kingdom. And so then you have the next thing on the scene is you've got the Brits going, our cover's going to be blown. So what do? They send Allison Saunders over here to meet with Bruce and Nellie Orr over dinner to do what?
Mueller's bidding coming from the Democratic National Committee decision of their committee, which had on it Alexander Chalupa, who went out and got Dmitry Alperovitch. They'd already gotten him really before that, but she worked with him to come up with the crazy Russian hacking accusation, which they knew that WikiLeaks had the material because there was a breach in their system. That's how they knew, right? There was a lie of a Russian, Dmitry Alperovitch. Oh my gosh, there's so many Russians involved, but they're all on the wrong side. So if we know that Mueller worked with the Brits, and who was Mueller's handler? The same
Arvinder Sambai.
Yes, the one who handled James Comey in the FBI.
Yes.
Arvinder Sambai, the head prosecutor for and FBI liaison directly for the Queen, Crown agent prosecutor. And she worked directly with, during that time, Alison Saunders, the number one Crown prosecutor at that time in Britain. Those are the people who said, I'll come to your help because Mueller asked them, because they were friends of Mueller's.
And their friends are vendors, friends of Mueller's, because of what happened at 9/11.
It goes all the way back to that, to cover up for that fake story that it was a Brit who trained the Arabs, the Muslims, who flew into the whole fake story of flying into 911, which was all lies, and she made up evidence to try to move the whole thing away from America and move it to Britain. That's what they do. When they want to cover something up, they say, no, it's a British thing. And same thing with the Brits. They say it's an American thing. They, back and forth, Five Eyes, they cover each other. But they lie to both, the citizens here and the subjects of the United Kingdom. So when this really goes back to its genesis, it was the moment you said yes, Mr. President, but it goes way back to Mueller and Arvinder Sambai covering up 911 and that horrifying crime, which they knew was a crime, and their fake investigation. There was a trail, again, a mile wide of the perpetrators. Look at James Baker and what happened in the palace of the King Saud. That's where the majority of the visas and passports were stamped and expedited by James Baker. I mean, you can't get any clearer evidence than the stuff that we have. All you have to do is look at Building 7 falling, free fall. Never happened in history that a fire, small fires, bring a building down that big in a free fall. Not possible. Mueller covered that up with Arvinder Sambai. Now, those are the people in Britain, like Richard Dearlove and Stephen Halper. They came after they got the desperate call from John Podesta and Hillary Clinton. And Hillary went back to the State Department and told Victoria Nuland, we have to get them with Russia. She says, no problem. We just spent $5 billion, actually $4.7 billion in Ukraine with all this fake propaganda against Russia. We got it all set up. And so the the Department of State offered their version of the dossier. Comey went out through FBI investigations of Trump and his dad, offered their part of the dossier. There's nothing in it. It has to be made up. Christopher Steele got his part from CNN iReport. Hillary added her part that she couldn't stand not having the PP part in there because that probably excited her and made her and John Podesta very happy to get this old accusation against another European leader that there is a video of him in a room, with the PP blah, blah, blah accusations. Well, they found that video because why? Sergei Milian went out and found it for John Brennan, and it wasn't Trump. And that was part of the fake operation. So out of the fake operation, they had to pay for all those people to set up George Papadopoulos. And I could go into all that, but let's remember, those are Mueller's friends. Joseph Mifsud, Mueller's friend. Arvinder Sambai's friend. Stephen Rowe, Mueller's friend. Richard Dearlove, Mueller's friend. I mean, I could go down the list. It's a list of 24 people who were on the other side of the Atlantic working against us. Alexander Downer, Andrew Wood, they're all literally these people have worked with Mueller.
What are we going to do
Jeffrey
about
Patty,
this?
Lord Malloch-Brown. The list is just disgusting.
I mean, what do
These are the
citizens
top dogs
do?
over there.
We see this right in front of us. We know who they are. We have the indictable evidence. What do citizens do?
Well, everyone is holding their breath that the redacted material for the application for the FISA warrant will name the Brits. It will probably name Stephen Halper because they know that he was their agent. $1.4 million they spent on him to set up Papadopoulos, Sam Clovis, and Carter Page. And he even paid them money. Papadopoulos was out in the news yesterday. They paid me $3,000 to come there. This was a setup. Who is Mueller? Mueller is part of the Highlands Forum. Mueller is part of the Rose Law Firm theft of patents going back so far that it's that same cabal, that same group of people that got the back doors into everything on the internet.
But then if you talk about the Highland Forum, you're talking about the Council on Foreign Relations, and then you're walking it back again to the Brits.
The Council on Foreign Relations is directly an extension of the Round Table, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. And it's like the Pilgrim Society and the Chatham House and the whole thing, which is a Milner Round Table and a Cecil Rhodes Round Table. And whether you like it or not, that's the reality, people. And go back and just plug in, if you want to do a search on this, Hillary Clinton, Council on Foreign Relations. She stands up and says, hey, we take all of our stuff from you. You know, well, I'm so glad you just put an office in so I only have to walk down the street so you can tell me what to do. That's what she was saying as she was running for office. She was saying, I'm not going to have a foreign policy. My foreign policy is just to have, as the Secretary of State, to break the Emolument Act worse than anyone in history. When I become president, it's going to get much worse. Well, I'm going to do whatever the CFR says, the Council on Foreign Relations. And it is evil, and the State Department, under her direction, and Victoria Nuland, spent $4.7 million in regime overthrow in Ukraine alone. They're proud to tell everyone this. That's why the reason they went after Manafort, because he was on the opposing side.
What is Obama doing over there making kissy faces with Angela Merkel?
Breaking the law.
Yeah, you're talking about the Logan Act.
He can't go out and talk policy or anything else with anybody else in the world, period. People don't seem to know, who are in these positions, that they signed a contract that they can't talk about anything that might be privileged for 5 years. But then they go on CNN and become a consultant, and they talk about their private conversations, which is executive privilege, the highest security there is. James Comey talked about his conversations with Trump, sent them out in his book, and now it talks about them as if they're just common knowledge. Well, guess what? Just because he released them as a leak and didn't get charged for it does not make it anything other than treason. That is executive privilege. There is nothing higher than that. If you have a conversation and you are the head of the FBI with the president and you release it even to your underlings or write it in a 302, that's treason, folks.
And Trump uses those words in these tweets. He says these are treasonous acts.
We've said it for 2.5 years when we knew what Comey was up to before he even got fired. And we named who was going to be that person. And then we named the process. And we named it its national security letters. And nobody has pointed that out. So guess what, George Papadopoulos? There probably is no FISA warrant for you, international FISA warrant. Okay? 702. There probably isn't one. And the ones that for the application was never used on Carter Page. There was never a hearing. So how is it they got permission to wiretap without ever having any FISA warrant approvals that went through a hearing? Because they didn't use them. That was their insurance policy, folks. It's literal. They weren't ever going to use those. And they sure don't want to have that evidence come forth. But the most embarrassing fact there is that the Russian dossier, the fake Russian dossier, which I mentioned has 6 different components to it, all glued together with super glue. Anyone who can't see that, it doesn't have beyond a 3rd grade education. Seriously, I lowered that from 5th. I'm keeping it at 3rd. Read it. Anyone read it. Now you hear everyone else saying these things. It's so stupid. Anyone who could believe that Russian dossier after one sentence... Those are my words. Now, not saying they took them from us, but that's the truth. You cannot read the first paragraph without bursting out laughing and say, where did you get this garbage? Seriously. And we paid $50,000 in installment from the FBI to Christopher Steele, and Comey lied about it. He lied about all 11 payments and said that, the only one he was going to pay was the 12th one in December, and the check was not signed, but he was thinking about signing it.
That's part of our brainwashing that goes on as we're indoctrinated in public schools, that these kinds of banana republics are always somewhere outside of America. Treasonous acts would be something that would occur in other countries. And this is why there's such a cognitive dissonance with people to even use the words treason and traitor, because those are not in our vocabulary.
That's right. We've never seen anything like this in history. It's unprecedented, but then so are his economy numbers. And if the Fed would stop worrying against him, and if we had a southern border, and if they would listen to him in these trade deals and not try to slip in at the end some clauses at the bottom that everybody wants to ignore, he would be winning so big that it would be beyond historic. It would be like, hey, that's what we have to be for the future, for now and forever. Keep America great, always. Add the A, Mr. President. Add the A. Keep America great, always. In other words, your party is going to stay in office as long as they keep following your direction. Of course, you're going to get reelected. That was done because when you seriously got $8.1 million to build the wall...
Not million, billion.
Billion, sorry. You now have, what is it, 99%? I saw one poll, 99% approval of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. And if he has 50% of the general population, that means he wins in a landslide like we've never heard of in history. And we know that those polls are all slanted. Very bad.
And the Democrats have nobody. It's just really bad.
It's a comedy routine, the people they're putting out there. Skinny Dippin' Joe, Slimy Joe, Creepy Joe. I mean, please, if that mother, who I saw him molest that child on film, someone needs to go to that mother and say, Child Protective Services is coming for your child if you do not make a report for what he did to your child, which now the whole world has seen because these videos show him
No, they're just focused...
molesting people. This isn't just friendly hugging.
No, the headlines all focus on him doing this to women and men. They're totally not talking about the children and the pedophilia that's going on.
That's my point. Child Protective Services needs to be called on
Yes.
Joe Biden. And plus, now listen, under a little stress, listen to his voice. The man is going to fall apart if he has to do any work. He did no work.
And then you've got Kamala Harris, and there's no proof that she's a U.S. citizen. We still need to see that. There's every indication that her parents were foreign students when they had Kamala. Well, so we're going to need to see some hardcore birth certificate evidence that she's a U.S. citizen.
Because Hillary's not in the running, guess what Joe and the lead Dems are throwing now? Oh, Trump was the birther guy. Trump didn't invent the birther thing. That was Hillary.
That was Hillary. And then you've got Beto, who's...
This man still believes in the Green New Deal, and it's been flushed down a non-green New Deal toilet because it belongs in the same place as the cow's methane. It shows, well, right now, her campaign violations are not 3, but they're 5. Beto's campaign violations are 2 from previous elections, which he didn't get prosecuted for, and he got that office. Isn't that amazing? But he and his wife had 2 companies, and he literally paid those companies.
So that just leaves Bernie.
Well, Bernie, we all know is Soros's man, and Bernie is complete fake. Anyone who would vote for Bernie doesn't understand. George Soros ran Bernie in case that intelligence report was true, that Hillary wouldn't swing far enough left to become socialist, literally a fascist socialist. And that's what we have, a cultural, Marxist, basically, chaos. Basically, Bernie is chaos Marxism, and he went far to the left, and he really won those primaries, and Hillary should have been knocked out of the race, and then Soros would have been back in the right person, which was Bernie, because Bernie was a fascist, and he was saying those things for the first time. But now that they've been said for so long by Bernie, who used to be a communist and was a Marxist and was a socialist and was very proud of it and never had a job in his life, is now out there, and what is he saying? Same old garbage, and no one should believe it, because if you've looked into it, he could only get money from the billionaires for 1 year, then they wouldn't have their companies anymore, and it would all fall down 1 year later. What happened in Venezuela? They got 20 good years, 10 of socialism, because why? They had the most oil in the whole world, and the socialist experiment with the most money in the whole world, and they failed this miserable. Well, guess what, Bernie? After 1 year, your socialist, Marxist fascism would simply destroy America.
Okay, so thanks for updating us on those very important tweets. If you want to read them, they are in the description box. Any closing statements?
That Mr. President, there were Genesis. If we could go back, we can go back to when Clapper got involved. We can go back to when each of the agencies got involved, and that's why Admiral Rogers came to you, so that the NSA, which we always tell you, get rid of all corporate intelligence, and that would include the CIA. Only go with military intelligence, and that's because why? You can court-martial them if they break the rules like Hillary did. Like General Petraeus, what happened to him? Life ruined because of one piece of paper, which was a setup with a spy, which was sent after him. It was a setup. Hillary does it to 750,000 documents, and nothing happens. So what we really need here is to understand that each and every one of these people, when did they get involved? If we can answer that. When did Obama get involved? When did Valerie Jarrett get involved? Loretta Lynch get involved? Each one of them got involved, and then we'll tell you when they got compromised. Because each of the people in the news blathering their mouths with that garbage coming out, like Clapper and Brennan and Comey and others, those are the most guilty. All you have to do is listen to who's being the loudest. Donna Brazile and Jonathan Weiner and anyone being loud. Why? Because they're yelling at you their alibis. And if you listen to the alibis, reverse them 180 degrees, put them all together, it makes a beautiful puzzle of exactly how the crimes happened. And that's how you usually then go. Follow that back to where the money was, like with Stephen Halper being paid $1.4 million. And then you find the agencies they were paid from. You find the Russians that Hillary paid to create the template for winning the election. And we can tell you, these people, Shevelenko, that Dmitry Shevelenko, he was in India. He was a Russian paid by GSA monies. So when you go back to the moments, you have to see that Hillary, years before, started the crimes that when the moment came that they said, the opposition research that we've already done through Fusion GPS on Trump says that he is so clean, we cannot find one single thing on him. Oh, and on the other hand, you're going to lose, Hillary, because you are so corrupt and there's so much collusion with Russia and Uranium One and all those people. If you don't do something, so they called in Mueller, they called in all of them, McCabe, they called in their Brit spies, they called in everybody, and they said, let's get a plan together. And they all went off in their own directions and committed so many crimes, they didn't even talk to each other. And that's the reason we can find the mile-wide trail of crimes, Mr. President. So if you want to know the exact moments, give us a call.